And I have with me Usama Bin Shafqat, Google's very own AI engineer and part of the founding team for NotebookLM. Usama, could we start with a bit of an introduction, a bit of a background, and about your time at Google?
Sure. Thank you for having me and thank you for coming. It's great to be here. So my name is Usama Bin Shafqat and I have been at Google for 6 years now. And before Google, I was doing my undergrad at Princeton University in New Jersey. And before that, I was in Islamabad. So it's a full circle moment back here. So I grew up here. I did my IGCSE and A levels here, and then I went abroad, and then I've been at Google since then. Um, and I guess I've been working on Gen AI specifically for the last 2 years. So just a little bit before ChatGPT, when people were realizing that something is up. Um, and before that, I was in something called Area 120 at Google, which is Google's incubator, basically.
Ah, interesting.
So I was working on a startup idea there that was about creator commerce and just helping creators make more money. Uh,
Very cool.
so yeah, that's a sort of the short TLDR.
Lovely. That sounds really interesting. Um, Google is known to be sort of a very the hub for innovation and creativity and a very cool working environment. What is one of the behind the scenes moment where you thought, this is why I show up to work every day?
Yeah, I mean, lots of them. So I guess Google is still known for creativity and innovation, but it is also a massive company with 160,000 employees. And as you know, like it's just everywhere. So it's like a lot of things now actually have to move very slow and deliberately. Um, so it's not the same culture, I would say, that it was
Interesting.
15 years ago, or even when I joined 6 years ago. I think there have been changes since then as well. But I think one thing that's still very much in our DNA is experimenting with things. So um, people who are drawn to experimenting with things are drawn to places like Google Labs, or 20% projects are still very much a thing
Right.
at Google. So you can spend 20% of your time doing anything else. And some of the best projects have usually come out of that, including some of the projects that you hear about at Labs. Um, but I guess if there was one moment, I think it's both that we can experiment. But I think one moment that shocked me recently was we had a very impromptu deal with Spotify that you might have heard about. So we essentially what happened was their CTO was playing around with NotebookLM, and he put his like wrapped summary that they had in some internal database. He took that and put it into NotebookLM and generated a podcast, and he was blown away. So he reached out to us and was like, "Can we make this happen?" The only thing was there were 45 days from that until the time they wanted to launch the product or launch Spotify Wrapped, and they wanted us to generate 170 million podcasts. For context, that's just no one has done that ever. But what shocked me was that so many people at Google came together to make this happen, not just in the notebook team, but across labs and across Google. And there were things that we were able to do at scale, like, for example, sending thousands of Gemini requests per second and like scaling the infrastructure to support that. So that made me realize that we can both experiment and be really fast and try to like build something new, but then we also have the capability to scale it to millions and eventually billions of users. So yeah.
It's very cool that you get the space to do both,
Mhm.
right? You get to focus on your work and you get to experiment and sort of expand your horizons beyond boundaries. That's pretty cool. Um, so if we divert a little bit back towards the topic of Notebook LM, if I were to ask you, what's the first word that comes to your mind when you think of Notebook LM?
It's actually 2 words, sorry. And that's also our motto, which is understand anything. And that's sort of the team mission. So um, we just want to make it very easy and flexible to be able to learn anything, understand anything. And then we're also moving towards like, that encompasses things like taking your content and then transforming it into something else. That's sort of where the podcast feature comes in. Like you're getting new connections, you're learning things in a new way, but it all sort of boils down to your understanding things. I would say that's our mission. That's what we do every day, basically.
Interesting. If I may ask, what was the inspiration behind having the specific podcast element in there?
So it actually started out as an experiment, like most good things do.
Of course.
We wanted to I guess I'll take a step back. So Gemini is from the very like inception. It's a multimodal model, so it understands audio and video, and it can create audio and video and images. We can't do all of that publicly yet, but like it has the capability to do that. So um one of the ideas there was, can we leverage more of that? Because no one is really like, there's voice mode and there's other things like that, but like no one has really tried to build um, actual useful content. So it was an experiment to like, we tried different formats. The podcast one really just stuck because like there's something magical about having two people discuss something. Um, and really it was just like one thing led to another. Like we sort of zoomed in on that and then tried to make it really high quality. And I guess it also, so we kind of developed that idea independently of NotebookLM, which is somewhat interesting. We didn't know we were going to put it into Notebook. Um, so we just wanted to make it as a generic tool almost that could take something and convert it into a podcast. But and in fact, only yesterday we launched something on the search app. So you can, it's going to roll out slowly, but you'll be able to get a personalized podcast from your Google search app, which is based on
Cool.
just everything that you search for. So like, you know how you have the Discover feed, which has a bunch of articles that show up based on your interests. Um, so we're just going to take that a step further and convert that in. Or we figured out that we would put this into NotebookLM. Put the same technology into NotebookLM much later.
Right.
But it went viral, so then we doubled down on that. But yeah, it comes down to the experimentation, I think.
Right. It is a pretty cool feature. Definitely the first time I'm hearing about something like that, actually. Um, so the entire concept of Notebook LM, it feels like a very significant and a very prominent shift in the world of AI. And as it focuses specifically on personalized note taking rather than the general AI chatbots that focus on more broader ideas. So what was the inspiration behind this focus? All right. So how did the team decide to hone in on this specific feature?
Yeah, I guess that was the idea all along, that you have a lot of AI chatbots and they're all very similar, and you can like maybe upload your own context as well, but like it's very much the construct is that you're in a single chat and you can make multiple chats, but like you can't break out of that mentality of like you're chatting to a like this autonomous thing, this amorphous thing that's like building out answers to what you're saying. The idea behind the personal aspect of it was that you'll just like in most applied disciplines. So while especially if you're a student or even for work increasingly, the quality of your interaction changes a lot when it's your stuff that's being talked about.
Very true.
Um, and especially when you can see where it's coming from. So like, I guess the high level idea was large language models are capable of analyzing a huge amount of language. So with Gemini, you can do up to 2 million tokens. That's an insane amount of text. Like you can never fill up 2 million tokens. It's very hard to fill up 2 million tokens. But what we're using it for in general, like chatbots, like the Gemini app or ChatGPT, is like you ask a question and you get an answer. But like we're not actually leveraging that ability to study and read and make connections through all the text that you can give it, text and images and audio and video and everything. Um, so the idea was, let's see what would happen if we make that chatbot conditioned and knowledgeable about your own sources.
Right.
And that's what we think was the right bet, because people find it immensely more useful. Now that, you know, it can cite back to like, okay, this report is where this number came from.
Right.
Because that's the biggest thing with chatbots. You just cannot trust what they're saying for the most part. So yeah, I think that was the core idea, and then that translated over to podcasts as well, where they are useful because it's your stuff that they're talking about, and no one else is going to make a podcast about, your resume or your whatever Wikipedia articles you're interested in. So, yeah, that's kind of the focus. It's like your personal note taking matters more than just like a generic chatbot.
Right. Um, and I'm just wondering, how would this have helped you when you think about it when you were a student? Must have been acquiring way, right?
Yeah.
Huh. So I like the concept of now giving back to those students who never had that opportunity. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. I keep telling anyone I meet who's in college, and like including my sister, that she's just so lucky to have this.
Right.
Like I can't even imagine how much easier college would have been if I had access to NotebookLM.
Exactly. I've been thinking about the same ever since I started exploring it. I've been telling all my juniors at university that you guys have to use this. It's going to help you a lot. But I'm sure building something as innovative and as different as Notebook LM, it must have come with a set of equally different and innovative challenges, so to speak. What was the biggest challenge for you developing Notebook LM?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, almost everything that we were doing was just net new. Cause like, and I'll focus specifically on the podcast feature because that's what I sort of started. Um, but everything in that feature was just completely new. Like, no one had done that before. There still is a huge amount of inference that happens every time. So there's a lot of inference that's happening. Um, so we had to make use of that every step of the way. And even evaluating the quality of something like that is really challenging because, um, for example, if you're building a simple like classifier or text-based LLM application, it's not easy, but like at least you know what you want to evaluate. Like if your app is summarizing news headlines, you know what a good one looks like, and you can create 100 examples and you can pay someone to rate them. But when we're trying to generate like 20-minute long podcasts, like how do you even begin to evaluate them, and what are the dimensions according to which you should evaluate the quality, and how do you do that iteratively so you can keep improving?
Right.
Um, so I think the answers, like the way we found the answers to those things was just, I don't think we still have the answers really. Like I think it's a lot of bite check. It's a lot of the team just really cares about the product and the output quality. So I think the larger point I would make there is that with Gen AI products, there's an aspect of taste. Um, Especially if you're trying to create new content. Like if you're just trying to solve a business problem, then there's still taste, but that just means, okay, like you really need to understand that business problem.
Right.
Because now we're not writing code, we're writing um, intelligent instructions. So that means you need to have a really good understanding of what output you're expecting. And then you need to be able to formalize it in the form of evals and hill climbing and all of that. So yeah, I think the challenge was just not having anything to draw off of, just completely greenfield, new development.
Right. And as a team, how did you guys work towards overcoming that?
I think it was we tried to formalize what we could, and we tried to like, for example, for quality evaluation, like take our best guess of what dimensions matter and build a survey and send it out to the general labs team and have them sort of force them to listen to this podcast and rate it.
Right.
But we also, I think like the doing something like that can also lead down this path sometimes where you get strangled because like you can't evaluate something for quality, and then so I think we and then you don't really make progress, but we kind of gave each other the room to understand that this is a brand new thing we're building, and we have to sort of trust each other's gut a little bit on like, I think this is better, like trust me. uh so stuff like that, I think we sort of help each other get over it as well.
Interesting. That's nice. Um, so if we talk about the use cases of Notebook LM, from what I've seen, there are a lot of them. Quite interesting ways to use them. What's the use case that excites you the most?
I think it's honestly the student use case still. Um, when we started out NotebookLM, students were our biggest user base.
Right.
And I'm not sure if that's still the case because the product has grown so much that I think there's a lot of professionals using it. There's a lot of developers using it. But I still feel like the fact that you can, I think, probably learn anything 5 times faster is, and you can learn it in a way that works for you. Like if you want to learn it in a podcast form and it's like your medical exam textbook, you suddenly have a very new way of learning it. And that means like, we can, people who maybe were held behind because not everyone enjoys reading, not everyone enjoys, um, like flashcards. Like now we just have new ways of learning those things. So I think that's probably what satisfies me the most in terms of a use case that helps people.
Right. And I feel like that's going to take over a lot, just like flashcards did, as you mentioned. There was time where everyone was using them. And I can really see this becoming the new normal for students. And I love how casually you can just put it out there. Okay, oh, I'll just put my notes in Notebook LM and I'll make a podcast out of it.
Right. And the fact that you can then listen to it in times when you couldn't have done anything otherwise, like when you're driving or walking or exercising or anything.
You can just passively listen to all that information and soak it up. That's pretty cool. Um, So I'm sure that a lot of the people from our developer community is really eager to explore the full potential of Notebook LM as well. So are there any underrated features that you feel like they might be able to leverage the most? Any hidden gems that you can help uncover for us?
So I guess not specifically for developers necessarily, but one thing that we launched just before the holidays, which is still in beta, is something called interactive mode, where you can play the podcast, but at any point you can sort of join the conversation and ask a question. And that will, the podcast hosts will basically, it's like calling into a radio show.
Oh, that's
So they will take your question into consideration and then maybe answer it. Maybe like you can also ask things like, can you make this simpler? Or, I already know this stuff. Can you make it more complicated? Um, so I would encourage everyone to try that out and let me know what you think. It's very new. Like there's some rough edges around it, and it's obviously like it's in real time, so it's very different from the generated podcast experience. But I also think that that's a bit underrated right now. Um, I think for developers specifically, I think so. Notebook isn't necessarily a developer focused tool per se, but I do know that a lot of people have used it um, in a way where you sort of download your GitHub repo, like any GitHub repo that you're trying to understand, uh, download it as a zip file, upload it into Notebook, and then generate a podcast or ask questions. And it works really well for that as well. The same thing as like learning anything, but in this case, you can, because it's under the hood, it's still Gemini, so it does understand code,
right.
or screenshots or mocks or anything. So people do use it to sort of, when they're new to a project, like just getting the lay of the land for what's going on.
Right. And if we move beyond using Notebook LM as a productivity tool, if what would you say if there are any specific use cases for other industries?
So we're actually seeing, whoa, sorry. We're actually seeing a lot of interest from basically every industry, um, all sorts of companies of all sizes who want to use Notebook for lots of different reasons, both internally. So let's say you onboarded to a company, and if the company had one notebook that contained all of the main information that you need to know about that company, so you can, like all the questions that you would have had to go find someone to ask, you can just ask that notebook because it already has all those sources. Um, and then beyond onboarding, also for a lot of functions where uh, typically like there would be some sort of a knowledge base that you would have to search for certain keywords and then find the answers to common customer questions, or what are our performance indicators for the last year, and all these things. Like a lot of companies are interested and are using Notebook to basically help make one single notebook with all of the resources, and then that can serve as a guide for everyone.
Right.
Um, so, and then there's the other use case of where the company can actually build a notebook and provide it to their customers. So, imagine if your car manual, I guess, came as a notebook instead of like a physical thing. So you could just open it up and ask questions, build a podcast, ask questions with voice.
Right.
Um, so basically, anything that can be understood and analyzed is something that Notebook is really good at.
Right. And what's the most surprising industry that you've come across?
Mm, I don't know. I feel like all of them, like when they explain, like maybe initially I'll be like, okay, what? Like, especially when they're dealing with numbers,
Right.
I'm a little surprised, like financial statements and stuff. But when they explain their use, because LLMs aren't really good at numbers yet, like no LLM is really good at numbers. But when they explain their use case, it usually does make sense because like the use cases will be about spotting trends and sort of the bigger picture. So when they explain their use case, I'm like, okay, fine, I guess. I haven't yet been like, okay, well, this wouldn't work at all.
Right. One point that I've been really thinking hard about is that Notebook LM it works with a lot of users' personal data,
Hmm.
right? And which then in turn obviously raises a lot of questions about data privacy and data concerns. So how do you as a developer strike a balance between being helpful, having your LM be helpful, and respecting these users' boundaries?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the principle we've had with Notebook LM from the very beginning, and it will continue to be hopefully forever, is that we don't train on your data. Um, so it's actually kind of unique in that sense compared to other AI products. Because we know that users are uploading their personal content, which can literally contain anything, we can never access it, we can never read it, we can never train on it,
Right.
which also limits us in certain ways because we can't really always understand what our users are using Notebook LM for. So we have to rely on other methods like talking to them to understand that. But we think that's a worthwhile trade off because um, this way, all of our users, both whether they're using it for personal purposes or for enterprise and industry, um, they can be very confident that no one has access to their data that they put into Notebook.
Right. That would be very good to know. And what happens if the data one uploads or a document one uploads doesn't have, it has partial data or incomplete data? How does Notebook LM deal with that?
I guess it depends to what extent data is missing. But I think for the most part, I guess that's actually a power of the LLM to probably try to predict the missing information if that's what you want to
Right.
use it for. Um, in general, to prevent hallucinations and made up information, we always cite where the answer is coming from. And the sort of the aim is that if something is not present in the source documents, we say that it's not present and we don't try to make something up. I mean, of
Right.
course, it's AI, so mistakes will happen, but that's the goal is to not try to like if you specifically ask like maybe you've written half a story and you want to ask like what are the possible endings or possible paths that this can take, or if your data is incomplete and you want to ask like okay predict what happens next, then we'll try to do the best. But if you're just asking something general and we know that this information is not in what you provided, we'll try to say that.
Right. Um, and looking ahead, where do you see Notebook LM in the next 5 years? What's your vision for its future? How do you see it evolving?
I think um so i think this is one question where like most people on the team have slightly different takes on,
Of course.
and we're still like I mean we're all trying to sort of consolidate that to a combined vision. But my personal take is focused on content transformation. So the podcast is sort of the first version of that. Like you can bring in text or anything and convert that into something that's new and it's useful
Right.
in a different way. So I think we can take that a lot further and we can create all sorts of content. So then Notebook can really become a tool that is helping you understand anything, but it's also doing it in the format that works best for you. So whether that's infographics or video or some sort of a game or anything really. So I think my vision is that in 5 years, because I think what LLMs excel at is understanding things, we can be the part that takes anything you upload and converts it into something else that's useful.
Right. And before we wind up and open the floor for questions, what key takeaways would you want our audience to know about the best ways to leverage Notebook LM and how to use it effectively for their projects?
hmm I would say just try to replace whatever other chatbots you're using, especially if it deals with if you have something to get started with. So if you have a repo or a research report or something that, which for most projects you do start with something, you don't start with zero. So whenever you're at that point, just like dump it into Notebook and start asking your questions there, and use the podcast if it's useful. Um, but also, I would say if you're into AI and if you're an AI developer, you should be trying to build Notebook from scratch. You should try to build your own notebook and see what that process is like.
Right. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I'd now like to open the floor for questions. Do you have any questions right to the moment?
Hello, Usama. Nice to see you here. First of all, congratulations on this beautiful and incredible product. My first question is that you said that under the book there is Gemini in Notebook LM. So we have Gemini chat version that is built on billions of parameters, and we have this Notebook LM. So what's the key difference between Gemini chat version and this Notebook LM? And second thing, you said that in other products like Notebook LM, there is not such kind of memory kind of thing which they refer to the previous papers or content you review, but Notebook LM has this power to sort of cite the informations. Can you explain a bit more technical that what's the key difference in this Notebook LM and the products like these? And my third question is, where is a bit generic, that since we grow and we read this social media era, so humans' attention span are very less. So how, what do you think that how much useful this podcast feature would be? Because a human is doing deep kind of research, a human uploads some sort of research papers, and he generates a podcast with those papers. So at some point he would just zoom on to get lost and might refer back to the podcast. So what do you think this podcast feature would have a significant impact in future or not?
Awesome. So I'll start backwards. I think in terms of attention spans, and I think that's a big concern generally. Like attention spans are shorter, but I think what we've realized and what we've noticed from our users is also that people just learn differently. So there are people who aren't able to focus on a book for 15 minutes, but if you give them a podcast, they'll happily listen to it and understand things and make connections. So, and some people learn better from YouTube video. Um, so this is just like something that we've built on the path towards letting people learn in their own manner. Um, so, so yeah. And then there are also like use cases where this is useful and where it isn't. Like if you're a machine learning researcher and you already know everything and you're trying to understand one paper in depth, then you would get a different podcast and you can instruct Notebook to build a different podcast. And if you're someone who's new to machine learning and you're trying to get an overview of 5 papers, like you can get a different podcast. So it's more in some ways, it's more useful for your whatever your use case is versus a generic podcast. Um, and then I think your second question kind of answers the first one. That's really the main difference between like a Gemini, which is a chatbot, which is like sort of a single thread that you can have an interaction in. It's sort of like an assistant, or it can help you write an email, or it can help you update some code. and then Notebook is more um, aware of your context and your sources. So for a project where everything, there's like, we can upload up to 300 sources. So if you're doing an assignment and that there's like 50 papers or readings that are relevant for that assignment, or you're doing some kind of research, you can upload all of them and then be able to refer to them at various points. Whereas you can't really do that in Gemini. It's a single thread chatbot.
No. So my question is a bit different to what NotebookLM is. It's a great product. It's actually upon Google Apps. We go to the website, you can actually submit different experiments. So what would you recommend as to, like the key takeaways of having an experiment actually be accepted at Google Apps? Like what could we do here, Stu?
It's a good question. I don't have a lot of insight into what the acceptance sort of criteria is, but I do know that generally the experiments that we featured in the past um, are the ones where someone's using AI to co-create something new. So, like for example, a musician who's already really good at what they do, but they are using AI to sort of help them build something new. So it's like the coexistence between humans and AI is the kind of experiments that lab surface is set up to do, versus I would say like, if you build an app that is doing RAG or doing something that's like pretty typical AI, like which is really cool and really useful, but I don't think that's the kind of experiments that they're looking for on the labs page. Not that you shouldn't do that, but like I think that's what the general takeaway is.
So my name is Amir and I am from Consort Apologies. So my question is that recently ChatGPT just launched a landline number. Customers like users can use that number and communicate. So I didn't knew about Notebook LM before, like forwarding it from LinkedIn and DTC page. So is there a possibility that Notebook LM can someday replace the customer support, or we can use Notebook LM as a customer support it's then data value use.
Yeah, so like we were mentioning earlier about how industries are using Notebook, that's definitely one of the use cases that companies have found to be worth it, where um, customers can get support because on the back end you can have a lot of knowledge and the customer can sort of be served a chatbot that helps them answer their question. Um, that being said, I think that's generally there's a lot of companies and a lot of startups in that space who are trying to do exactly that, because it seems like relatively low hanging fruit to automate customer support. Um, so I think it'll be clearer in a year or so what kinds of use cases Notebook LM is specifically better at versus all the other companies who are solely focused on replacing or I guess augmenting customer support. Good question. Thanks.
Do we have any other questions? No more questions? Right. Thank you so much, Chilama. Thank you for your time. Before you leave, we do have a small token of appreciation. So Masood, if I may invite you to the stage.